In order to run a successful company, one of the most important components is product and brand design. A picture says 1,000 words. And today, we'll be talking with Shagane Barsegian, CEO and Chief Design Officer of Vale. We'll touch on her personal and professional life and how she's leveraged her talents and abilities to implement proper UX design and mentorship and coaching. She's worked with several companies in helping them with their branding, and we'll dive a little deeper into what makes her tick, what provides her this inspiration to give back to the community. All right, Ms. Shagane, how you doing today?
Hey Jay, so good to hear from you.
Absolutely, likewise. So, for the audience, go ahead and give us your formal job title, what you do for work.
Awesome. Well, first I want to say thank you to you for hosting me and inviting me to speak and share a little bit of my world and to the audience, connecting and exploring different careers for themselves. So I am a user experience designer. There's a lot of different parts of me. I am an artist, a fashion designer, a maker, but professionally speaking, I chose design as my career. And there's a lot of different aspects to design. So the part I work on is user experience design. And I work both as a designer and as a design manager and as a design leader. So when I speak, sometimes I am speaking as a creative director who is mentoring a designer and needs to shield them and build up confidence and make them believe in themselves. And sometimes I speak as a leader who has to focus a CEO or a product manager who designs software. I need to focus them on what they need out of design, but then sometimes they start to micromanage design and I need to create like gates of where their feedback is really important and what we trust and leave for the designer and design manager to do. But my goal basically in my work is to help people experience technology or software and have a good time with it. So we design for a feeling, but we use tools like typography, color, user information design, systems design, these days AI and things like that to make things simpler and easier. Mm-hmm. But that's the gist of kind of where the realm that I'm at.
Wow, that's a lot. Let me try to unpack this a little bit. So it seems like there's multifaceted approaches to what you do for work, right? You take on not just the creative role, but you also take on an advisory, mentoring type of role, right? Like in a mentorship, essentially you're embedding all your talents within one, which gives you the flexibility in this industry to implement all the different, talents that you bring to the table. Is that accurate?
Yeah, totally. And the thing is, it's really intimidating for all of us because the industry keeps expanding. It's a really broad field. And so any designer that passes through me, I say that as a manager and as a designer, right? Like sometimes I'm networking with my friends from the days I lived in San Francisco or from other chapters of my career or designers I mentor on ADP List. It takes a lot of calibrating to really understand anyone who calls themselves a designer because there's so many types of designers. There's brand designers, there's logo designers. There's in LA, we have a lot of entertainment designers that do motion work or posters for the entertainment industry, but it's very different type of work than the work that I do with design systems or product software work or complex brand systems that work for portfolio companies. And so every designer is beautiful, everybody's journey is valid, but it's like you're trying to zoom in and understand. Either with the client side, you're trying to understand with the CEO or the manager. The manager sometimes is a marketing manager. Sometimes they could be a developer, it could be a CTO. So you work with a lot of different characters and you're trying to understand the problem, right? The person who is the source of the problem. And let's say the funder, the executive sponsor, we call it sometimes. And you're also trying to match that with talent because sometimes if the executive sponsor who has a really complex project doesn't understand how to break down complexity to that junior designer, you need like people who translate things. So you are working with designers on one end, translating a lot of things, and then you're working with people who have the money to sponsor projects. And as kind of you reflected, because the world of technology keeps expanding, we have design ethics, we have accessibility design. There's more, like, we need to understand front end, we need to understand back end, we need to understand quality assurance. And so you come from Scrum background, project management, advanced project management concepts are very important. And so there's a lot of learning. And one of the biggest things I've started doing in the last year is people I work with, I'm slowing them down, because the biggest thing we are all worried about is shame and not being enough. And I think for each one of us every day, just hearing that we are enough.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. 1000%. It's almost like instilling the philosophy that you are enough, instilling that confidence to your team so that it works better for everyone all around at the end of the day. Like, there is some coaching that goes into what you do. There is some liaison work that you have to do between two separate entities that are essentially trying to have a cohesive functionality of some software or tool that's pushed out, but they may come from different worlds, right? And so we're having to translate different sectors of communication into one to make sure we're all speaking the same language, so that when we push this thing out, it's meeting our end users' needs to the best of its ability.
You said it. I love it. Like, remember, you and I at some point spoke in person about how you navigate the healthcare industry, and how sometimes you will meet providers and there's very different concepts of how people work, right? And as you said, like, sometimes we assume everyone thinks like we think. And right. Boy, it can be really expensive when we don't check our thinking and validate. And then, as you said, synthesize our thinking. And nobody wants to spend money on it. Like, there's no CEO or no manager wants to spend budget on explaining things and synthesizing.
For sure.
Right. But as you and I are reflecting on it, it's number one driver of success. That's what creates harmony. That's what creates trust. And so everyone is walking around with a huge bag of shame today, because I mean, I've worked in the industry. I finished grad school in 2009. And I mean, I feel like I've worked a good amount of time, but I feel like a baby being born yesterday because there's so much change. And when I do interviews or when I talk to designers, I feel like a huge imposter syndrome. And that's where, like, I think we need healing in tech. I think we need to heal spaces in tech. And part of my work, stepping back into my work now in 2025, is really through the lens of healing, because we are all disrupted. We are all pushed to do more and demand more of ourselves and others. And if we just can, like, be a little humbler and softer and kinder, we'll just be happier people and make a happier world. So that I'm trying to, like, live from that place. But it's hard because I get sucked into the funnel and the stress and the not enoughness on a daily basis.
Well, I mean, especially dealing in the tech world, right? Like, there's so many different changes, like as you alluded to, but there's so many high demands and there's competing entities to kind of adopt this new technological approach that's been hitting the world, right? Of this AI introduction and all of these different software tools to carry out automation efforts, etc. It can be overwhelming at times for folks, maybe on the front lines of the programming and development components or design to your situation here, and just take a step back, breathe, remain humble, approach this from a holistic effort would potentially carry out better outcomes and more sanity for the people that are responsible for delivering these end user pieces here, right? Like, I think your approach and the bit that I understand about you is that you definitely have that warmth, that comforting type of vibe when you approach your work. So what inspired you to initially get into this specific line of work? Because you have a lot of different things you've done in your past, but the UI design as today, what's inspired you to get into this type of work?
Sure. Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was just like nodding nonstop. And I'll just like add a little liaison and then answer the question you asked. I've been doing a lot of reading about indigenous cultures and indigenous stories. And I mean indigenous stories all over the world because, for example, I do hula dancing. I'm part of a Polynesian dance school.
Nice.
And we study Ori, which is from Tahiti, and hula dancing from Hawaii. And so I really love the beauty of the stories and mythology from the two cultures. And then I am Armenian Russian, and there's Armenian mythology and Russian Slavic mythology. Slavic mythology connects to some Swedish and Finnish mythology and stories, right? And here in US, we have a beautiful, rich tapestry of different indigenous cultures we can tap into. And I'm really inspired and fascinated to going back to like the wisdom on land that we've had in all countries for like centuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And working in tech, you know, and you said like, how did I get here? Well, I went through a massive burnout, and part of the burnout, part of it was like personal, part of it was family, part of me was just like living and experiencing life. And now I'm a little wiser in how to work and what kind of environments to be in. But also like a large part of it was realizing that I have certain sensory issues, and I am neurodivergent, and there is parts that there's sensors that my body's missing that other people have, and I can tolerate pain a lot. I can overwork myself. I don't feel hunger, so I'm more likely to, and some of these behaviors came actually through my son. And it was a really interesting process because I was like trying to figure out and understand myself and my body as a woman in her 40s, which feels like why am I doing this exercise in my 40s? But you know, it's like it comes whenever it comes. Realizing there's quirky things about me that I never got a manual for. Then there's quirky things about my kids that I never got a manual for. And then reconciling with my ex-husband, and then forgiving each other for quirkiness, and then coming back together as a family. Really like learning to suspend judgment and practice kindness, but also like observe and be like being curious, like why are we behaving like that? And so I'll just give 1 minute more. I realized that there's sensory things that I've been experiencing all my life, but I never paid attention because life just wants us to move on, to speed up. And so part of my experience burning out, overworking, is feeling not enough, feeling that I need to prove myself, being a little girl deep inside, and maybe, still thinking that like I would have been locked at home and like worked in the kitchen all my life. And here I am having an opportunity to work in the corporate world in a wonderful country, and then feeling a huge amount of guilt to like make up for that privilege, and overworking and overextending myself and burning out. And then learning, how do I reclaim my relationship with what I define as success? How do I tend to my body? How do I tend to other people's bodies, right? Because especially as you work with other people, manage and lead other people, you have to be careful to be respectful to their bodies, because their bodies also have to maintain families and cook dinners and pay bills and do all these other things behind the scenes of just producing design work for other busy managers who demand deadlines and more work, right? So, and it's a great, right? It's a good opportunity, is a gift, because it's like a great adventure. There's a great thing I heard where everybody needs like a range of two different polar opposites. Like, you don't want life to be too stable because then it's boring, but you don't want life to be too adventurous because then you're stressed out and it's too much uncertainty. So how do we all design enough adventure in our lives? And so as a design manager and as a design leader and as a designer myself, when I'm designing or I'm leading design, I have to constantly figure out what's a healthy way between stability of adventure and adventure. If I overprotect my designers, then Shagane is a boring manager. Nobody wants to be a boring manager, right?
Right.
If I give too many projects and I overstimulate a designer gets burnt out. And for me, like, I work a lot on diversity in tech. It means we invite talent and we make teams that are healthy for all types of people. And so, for example, it's very clear when I work, even, I think that there's a lot of different tending that needs to happen with different people. But because I'm a woman, I see with women very clearly. I have to work very differently with women, right? And sometimes you're not even allowed to say that because you're supposed to treat everyone equally, but you can't because everyone is a little bit different. And so as a manager, again, you're definitely standardizing a lot of things because you have a design department or you have a company to run. But at the same time, every soul is special and unique, and no person is a duplicate of another. And so you are still tending to every person very specifically at the same time.
Absolutely. I think that you definitely bring a lot of empathy into the work that you do. Obviously from a personal experience, but understanding people from a social experience, and you have empathy towards people with their needs. Everyone's different. So it almost has you to have to be all encompassing in your approach. And that'll bring me to the point of you in Venus Vale, right? Let's talk about you being the CEO and Chief Design Officer for Venus Vale. What is the vision of Venus Vale?
Thank you, Jay. These are challenging. It's always challenging. Like whenever I want to say we live in challenging times, I'm like, Shagane, when has it not been challenging? Like, 1,000 years ago? Like, when was it not challenging, right? So I like to check ourselves sometimes because we think we're so special, and right now it's so unique and challenging. And it's like, no, dude, it's just life. Our grandparents faced interesting moments. They faced marriages, births, divorces, no job, celebrations and deaths and all of it. But with Venus Vale, basically, I am inspired to start an organization. I'm not sure where specifically it will lead. It will be focused around design practice and working with different designers and company. I think, as I shared with you as we were chatting a little bit earlier, my goal is really to explore I think ethical design, I'm not going to call it special because I think anybody working in technology today, whether you don't have to be a designer to practice ethical design, right? You could be a person working in QA, you could be a project manager, you could be a developer, you can be a marketing product manager. There's different roles we have in technology. Sometimes we have writers. And so ethical design, it's just like ethical decisions. We build ethical products. We want to create an ethical world, right? And I'm sure all of us have faced moments where there's sometimes gray lines. And right, and how do you steward an organization slowly towards good design, towards good decisions, towards respecting the user? So I think there's a lot of people out there practicing ethical design. They might not say that, but I think everybody has a good heart, and we try to channel that good heart and make a better world. The second part I would say is it's a field that I feel very lucky that I discovered called trauma-informed design. Trauma-informed design is pretty broad, and what I've learned, I've been exploring it since March, thanks to a group. It's an open source group, so if you're hearing about this, you can find the group. There's resources. You can join the monthly calls, and I would say I'm still a student. But trauma-informed design started by, I think, around Obama administration, because Obama administration spent a lot of money in hiring tech workers. And so you had all these developers, designers, building interfaces for the Veterans Office and other initiatives where through government, you were trying to digitize things and services that were maybe more in person prior. And so you have people who are basically not trained in working with people with trauma, designing technology for people with trauma. And basically now this community is creating resources of how content strategists and designers can, and design researchers can enter trauma-informed about into spaces where there will be trauma, right? If you're working with veterans, there will be trauma. If you're working with homelessness, there will be trauma, right? And so sometimes the employees themselves, whether it's a designer or a design researcher or a developer, might experience secondhand trauma and they need systems of support. For me, I experienced something very unexpectedly. I experienced trauma. I didn't know the words back then, but when we went through a merger, the company that I worked for went through a merger, and there was a radical transition of culture, and there was a lot of grief, but we didn't have the right words to process grief, and there was so much change that radical change can create also a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so looking back and then finding these resources, I realized, wow, Shagane, like you went through trauma, and nobody really says it. It's hard to call it that. And so it took me a really long time to figure out what's wrong with me. Why am I stuck on certain concepts? What am I scared of? And so I think with Venus Vale, a lot of the user experience work and tech work, it's going to be kind of like the same work. We produce features, we help build companies, we help design portfolios, company complex product portfolios. But a lot of the human work at Venus Vale will be like trauma informed and tending to that softness that we really need in the world, that softness, that kindness, making sure that when we build interfaces, we are thinking of all sorts of people that it can be touching and how it can like come off from different lenses.
So you have to take like quite a few, you touched on it earlier, as far as like folks coming from different professional backgrounds, QA, developers, etc., which would bring me to the question of, is there, in your experience, I call it, we know the soft skills versus the hard skills, right? The more personable skills versus more technical oriented skills. What type of experience would you suggest for someone trying to get into this line of work that you do, from a soft skills and a hard skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this, by the way. I think this is so cool. I think this is what you're asking about is the most important part, right? Because look, like you and I, right? Somebody somehow made it safe for us to be here, right? To learn the things we learned. And I think it's really special to keep like dropping the barriers down. And like even when I apply for jobs, sometimes I get scared and I feel not enough. And I really sometimes worry about like how over maybe design sometimes tech is, or applying for jobs is. And so when I mentor designers, I try to paint a very basic arc. And the arc that I see in designers' careers these days is that just like start having fun. Everything starts with fun. Do a logo for your best friend. Do a poster for a garage band, around your block or somebody's family friend. So start with pet projects. I really love pet projects because when we have creative, like that energy, that adrenaline, it has to come out, right? And it doesn't matter where you spread it. So start with pet projects. Even when I mentor designers who finished like design school, I ask them to include pet projects, because when you're applying for different jobs, you will have gaps, and pet projects are the cheapest way to fill a gap and show something. Like I'll give you an example. Let's say I have sometimes people from grad school, and maybe their projects are like super nerdy, very research based, and there's like a lot of process but not enough design deliverables. Like there's not enough design artifacts. Basically it's like a lot of words, a lot of things they did, but I'm like, show me what is it, right? And so some parts of design, they cannot be reduced to an artifact. We need both. We need designers that do a lot of different things. So like a senior designer will have a combination of both. But it's normal for a junior designer, they'll either have one or the other. And so, for example, when somebody's missing an artifact, it's like, go find a nonprofit and help them do an Instagram campaign, design them 30 social media posts. And so I'm really big, I'm a very hacky person. Like I love hacking things because I think there's something to not overthinking, and I also don't believe in following all the rules, because as a society, especially in Western culture, we are so over-regulated. Everything is so many rules, like do this, you must go to college. Like, I love helping people like veto things. Like if you're starting a business, you don't need a logo. You can have a business for 2 years and never have a logo. So like there's a lot of things where we can break rules. And so for young people or people considering switching careers, I would say see where you can break rules. Do things for fun, because that's your engine. Your engine is going to run as long as you're having fun. If it's going to be boring or scary, you're going to shrink and shut down. Play with nonprofits. Play with small businesses who can have you do this or that. Right? Maybe you can help set up someone Google Analytics, which is search engine optimization. And then maybe you like just do some free work for them for 6 months. And then you realize, oh, I'm actually like really analytical and numbers are easy for me. And all of a sudden you're like working with a web design firm, taking small projects on SEO on Upwork, right? I love Upwork. I like that it's a very general labor pool. And like, for example, as a designer, there are certain design platforms like Behance where you can go look for designers. But I always recommend designers to work with a platform like Upwork, because if I'm a marketing manager or I am just like looking for an email specialist, I don't know where all the email people unite. I'm going to go to a general site like Upwork and look for someone to do some gig work for me, right? And so exploring yourself and selling yourself on these small projects and testing it out. And then I also say, like, life helps us, people help us. Things will start to move somewhere. It's like trusting the universe a little bit. But in general, an arc of a designer is we start with smaller little projects. Let's say a logo. We do an Instagram post. Maybe then we do 30 Instagram posts, right? And so you start on brand and then you touch more areas of brand. So like areas of brand is, for example, email marketing. You know how to build emails in an email builder. You understand email rules. You understand how emails end up in spam. Then you start to maybe move to websites. You do small websites based on Squarespace or WordPress or other web builders. And then you start to move to complex web apps where you're actually designing from scratch and you're working with developers and architects to engineer completely new experiences. And then typically designers end up in product design, which is like very more complex, more advanced area of design that is intersection of UX design, visual design, content design, research design, and all these other aspects of design.
So it's like you have a multifaceted approach, right? For the soft and the tech, there's a lot of tech skills you can bring to the table with regards to the UX design, UI design, email development, logo designs, etc. But also the soft skills to be able to understand, to challenge the status quo sometimes, bring your own creative approach to situations and thinking outside the box a little bit, understanding the particular client's needs to tailor that approach better. But ultimately getting these reps under your tool belt to be able to present that in case you're trying to get into some sort of work like this. You have projects like your pet projects or your side projects that you've done, which ultimately speak more than anything you could say verbally, right? Here's the product that I have. Here's logo designs that I've done. Here's some of the design work that I've implemented. That speaks a lot better than me just talking to you for 30 minutes about what I potentially am capable of doing when I actually have hard artifacts to present here, right? So it doesn't sound like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, any particular formal education or degrees needed to get into that type of work. You're gonna have to have some computer savvy, some tech skills, etc. But is there any formal educational pathway that you would recommend folks to take?
I told you I'm a rebel. I mean, I'm a rebel who went through the system, but I have hired people that never went to grad school, never went to design school, never went to college. And I believe that there's space for everybody. There's space for everybody. And what I was taught when I was a girl who just graduated fashion, and I started studying, it was called interaction design when I started out in 2007. And my mentor, Brenda Laurel, who is a famous publisher and a game designer, she would always say, like, we need different brains in tech industry. We need different brains in design, because that's how we design the world we need for tomorrow. And so like I always think of that. So like even when I mentor designers, yeah, some designers might have a different skill level, and somebody might, yeah, you can look subjectively at someone's work and say, okay, this is a better logo designer, this is like not really my type of logo designer. But actually it doesn't matter, because each person is somewhere in their journey, right? And so I look at people mostly through the eyes of mentoring, which is like they're not the final product, they're in the process of becoming. Ooh. So if it just, right, it's like they're becoming, but also like, because I can judge them and say, hey, you're kind of a crappy logo designer, but that's first of all really discouraging and sad.
Right.
But second of all, what if their goal is not to be the best logo designer? Maybe they're gonna maybe they're super talented in marketing and sales, and they're gonna have like the coolest company of tomorrow in 5 years, right? And here I am, sad Shagane, judging them on just something so small as a logo design. So what I like to do is ask them where they want to be and where they're going, because where they're going, they might not even need logo design skills, right? I'm just using logo design as an example. So I'll say, hey Jay, where are you going? And based on where you're going, I'll be like, okay, does that even apply? Because a lot of times it doesn't apply where you're going. Not every product designer needs to be a good logo designer. Not every good logo designer needs to be a web designer. So that's where I said, in the beginning when I started talking, like tech has become so big. I really don't judge anyone when I start talking to them, because there's so many assumptions we can start to make if we live in our brain, right? If I live in Shagane's brain, I start to make assumptions that this person should be this, and this. But who said? Well, I don't know where they're going. I don't know what company they're applying for. If they just want to do email templates, why do they need web design and product design and content strategy? So we have to be really careful telling people what to do, especially if you are in a mentorship position. Your goal is to really help them go do stuff, versus making them shrink and scared, and then they get paralyzed and they say, oh, I'm not enough, I will not do that because the world doesn't need me. It's more like the opposite. The world needs you. See what's fun for you today and start with that fun part, and see where the little, in Russian fairy tales, we have like the yarn, you take a roll of yarn and you roll it into the forest, and you see where the adventures take you through the forest, and you kind of follow the yarn. It like comes up in different folklore and stories. And so I feel like you and I, as grown-ups, as adults, as parents, we need that kind of thinking too, because we all get exhausted of like worrying about jobs and salaries and like proving ourselves to our management or to our clients. And so we all need like to be told like, oh, just start where it feels right, and then follow that yarn, follow into the forest, go adventure.
I like that visual analogy you provide of rolling the yarn out and seeing kind of where it takes you. So it sounds like you welcome the diversity of thought, right? Which is important in an industry such as this, to welcome all different perspectives, because you don't know where it could take you when you're willing to hear the different perspectives that they bring into this ultimate design that you guys can build together. And so the mentoring that you do is also important to understand each individual professional's ultimate goals. You can't have a cookie cutter template for where each person is going to lay out. Their yarn's going to take them down a different path than someone else's yarn. So I think that's important, to be able to embrace the differences that we bring to the table, understand each other's needs, and then tailor a game plan, right, that would meet each professional's, potential outcome, right? So, man, that's a lot of good information. I dig the perspective that you bring, and the openness and vulnerability that you show is key to ensuring that people know that they have somebody who's passionate about what they do and they care about putting out good work, right? So I guess in closing, like, are there any particular socials, IG, LinkedIn, etc., for folks who want to, get more acclimated with you, to connect, and where can they reach you?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Jay. By the way, that was a really great synthesis. And I think just like self-care, you and I know, again, as adults, that's where we all don't do enough self-care, right? And it's just like everything starts with how you treat yourself. And I feel like a lot of it is like tending to yourself, loving yourself, reminding how much you do. That gratitude towards yourself is huge. Because like when we are unstable on our foundation, and at least I'll speak for myself, when I feel like I'm not enough and I feel ashamed and guilty in front of the world, then the second thing I hear of something in the world that says, Shagane, you're not enough, I'm just like on the couch hiding from the world, because we're all sensitive and we absorb these messages of, and the world keeps having more information, and we judge ourselves by how much we can sponge that information, but we can't sponge that much more. Like there's limits to our body, to our brain. And so that guilt keeps growing. And I think a lot of the mental work today is like reminding yourself that you're beautiful, you're special, you are enough, you have a place in this world. Anyway, I think that's a really big thing, like literally have to practice it every day, not to forget. As far as reaching and connecting, if it's anybody interested in design or getting into design, I host free mentorship hours on ADP List. It's a wonderful platform. Felix is the founder. He's super approachable and friendly, but it's a great platform for all sorts of roles in tech for mentoring. I host 3 different design hours. They're called design parties because they're celebrations of designers whatever stage they're at. I have leadership design party. I have senior mid-career design party for senior designers, principal designers, lead designers, and I have an early career design meetup as well, which is great for anyone who is dabbling in design or wants to get into design. Or I also spend a lot of time talking about non-design design careers.
Wow.
Jay, that's something for you to explore too, because there's a lot of jobs like support, writing, like there's marketing. There's a lot of jobs where you're designing technology without designing in a design file.
Are these design parties, are they on the ADP? I just want to make sure they can find you if they're interested in these design parties that you put on. Are those on ADP?
They are on ADP List, which is a platform, and I'm happy to send it to you afterwards too, for links. The company that I have launched is called Vale, and that's a design studio based out of LA. And then if anyone's in LA and likes to craft and art, I also started an art collective called Folk Lounge, where I do embroidery socials to meet in nature and parks with people and embroider and craft and trade knowledge peer-to-peer, like community-based. So I call it like healing through art and communing with land. So if that's something fun and interesting, you're welcome to come hang out and meet people.
So basically all they have to do at this point, it sounds like, is just Google Shagane, and then they have an access to an array of different services that she provides. She also does walks on the beach. She designs shoes, and she's an architecture. I don't know. It's like, she does a little bit of everything.
Yeah, which is like, how do you design life as a neurodivergent person when you get bored easily, need a lot of stimulation? And also, how do you even describe the narrative? Because a lot of the professional narrative is very singular. And what you pointed out, I struggle with that. When you have a lot of different passions, how do you reconcile these different personalities? Right?
Yeah, it's like having it's almost like the jack of all trades curse, right? You have so many different talents, it's hard to really hone in on one particular skill. So what you've done and been able to, monetize is the multifaceted approach that you bring to keep yourself, on your toes, keep things interesting, keep things lively and fun. And that's ultimately, I think, what you bring to your clients, which is good. And I appreciate you taking the time today and sharing some of your perspective, some of your work experience, and the different services that you offer to the public. So appreciate that.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me. Thank you for these very thoughtful questions and wonderful moderation and conversation as well.
Absolutely. This was Shagane, CEO and Chief Design of Vale. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jay.
All right.
See you soon.